In this video, we're going to break down the Analogue products, the Mr. product, and all the new announcements that are coming from Analogue and which one you might want to get and the future of FPGA programming. So let's jump right in right now. So Analogue just put out a press release of their own little marketing campaign, which is way overhyped, and we'll talk about that in a second, about a new product that's coming out in December called the Analogue Pocket. Let's rewind for a second, talk about other products that they have. They have the Super NT. This is the one on the left. It can take Famicom cartridges. It can take Nintendo cartridges. They have the Super NT, which is basically a Super Nintendo that can take the original Super Nintendo cartridges. And then you have the Sega Genesis over here that can play the Sega Genesis Mega Drive products. All of these emulate perfect, like beautifully, because Kevin Horton, the developer, is behind it, and because of FPGA programming. So we're going to be talking about FPGA programming. Think about hardware. Think about circuits. Think about little chips that are inside a circuit board. Now, FPGA programming is this idea that you can recreate an entire computer system by writing a schematic. And you write that schematic and you flash it to this drive, and it can recreate all those chips and circuits that are on the original gaming console. Take, for example, what Kevin Horton did in an interview with RetroRGB Bob. He explained how he took the Super NT and reverse engineered it down to the zeros and ones. Like, he wrote these test cases where he'd throw zeros and ones at the Super Nintendo, a real Super Nintendo, and analyze all the zeros and ones that would come out the other side. And then he took his schematic and wrote it so it'd have exactly the same logic. Every single chip was reverse engineered, one by one, logic by logic, circuit by circuit, bit by bit. And then, when he was all done, he threw a cartridge in it, and boom, it played Super Nintendo games nearly flawlessly. And then he got it out to the field, people beta tested it, and he did a couple patches. This is super high quality video gaming. You're going to pay a little bit more for it, but it's definitely worth it. Meanwhile, these are the three products that Analogue came out with a few years ago, and the new anticipated product coming out is now basically a Game Boy. It's called the Analogue Pocket. But meanwhile, a group of developers made this thing called the Mr. Mr. is based on an FPGA development board that you can buy on its own and load firmware that is from this open source community. Now, we're going to talk about some of the problems that we have with the older Analogue products and the Mr., something they have in common. But before we do that, we're going to talk about the EverDrive. Check this out. So the EverDrive is this ability to play Nintendo games. Like, this is a Nintendo EverDrive. You can play Nintendo games on the original cartridge. Now, why are we talking about this? Guess what? This also uses an FPGA, but the FPGA is emulating the cartridge down to the circuit level. And they have other ones, there's different ones for different systems. So you have ones for Game Boy, you have Sega and Super Nintendo, all with different compatibilities, because guess what? When Nintendo and Super Nintendo and Sega came out with their different cartridges, they kept on changing the technologies, and there's different memory mappers in there. And over time, the Crits group and the people that are behind the EverDrive and the Power Pack and a couple different cartridge emulators out there kept on updating it, increasing the compatibility. Okay, what does this have to do with the Mr. and the Analogue? Well, one of the problems with a lot of these products is when you look at the games, they only display text. That is true when it comes to the Mr. When it comes to these older Analogue products, which, by the way, are great. I'm not saying anything because they're older doesn't make them not as good or something. And these EverDrive products, you basically see a list of games, but it's all in text. But aha! The Analogue product, this new one coming out, they're calling it the Analogue OS. The reason why they're calling it the Analogue OS is because they want to show that going forward, all of their products are going to have this analog operating system. And the main feature that came from the tweet that is actually interesting, that's beyond all the hype, is that it's an FPGA system that will display the games. It'll actually display a menu that shows the games that you can potentially play. That has got me excited. There's an entire product called the Polymega that I've also pre-ordered, and the main feature is that you can select all the games going through it. Now, this one has a little bit of complexity to it, okay? Because the Analogue Pocket itself, you have to put the cartridge in there, and then you can play the game. But I guess with their press release, they're saying that you can scroll through all the games that are in this database or catalog that you would download onto it, and you can explore all the games and when they came out and descriptions about the game. But when you hit play game, it says, please insert the cartridge, which is interesting because the previous products of Analogue, when the firmware was first released, the same day these products were released, there was a jailbroken firmware that was released on GitHub. When you sideload the jailbroken firmware, you can sideload the majority of Nintendo, Super Nintendo, and Sega Genesis games on these respective products. Now, again, it doesn't have 100% compatibility because when you sideload the ROMs onto these systems, it's both got to emulate the system and the cartridge. And remember, we talked about those memory mappers earlier, and the jailbroken firmware does not have 100% compatibility. Some people would get these EverDrives and use that in their Analogue product, and it would work. You would basically have the best of both. You would have full compatibility maybe on the EverDrive, and then you'd plug it in to this FPGA system, and it goes to your HD TV, and it looks great. But this one is more like a Switch where you can dock it. Check this out. You can play it in handheld mode. You can play it in what's called CRT PVM mode, and you can play it in LCD OLED mode, which means when you dock this system, it's going to change its resolution based on what you're plugging it into. So 16:9 resolution for your LCD OLED, CRT PVM, BVM is going to be like a 4:3 screen, and in handheld, it's got its own resolution. It's really high, something like 1600x900 resolution when you're playing it natively. The question is, will you be able to sideload your own games? Will you be able to throw an SD card in here, and when you go through the Analogue OS and you hit play game, if there's a jailbroken version of it, will it just play the game because it'll find it in your SD card? Or could you get like an EverDrive and map it and make it so when you plug in the EverDrive, you can find that game in the catalog of the Analogue Pocket and it'll just play the game? Or is it just like they're actually claiming inside their tweet where they say they're not going to support any form of piracy in here? Let me see if I can find it here. Here it says Analogue Pocket does not play copyrighted ROM files. Now legally they have to say that they're not marketing to be able to like circumvent any IP or anything like that. It's not gonna the Analogue Pocket does not play copyrighted ROM files or dump cartridges. It plays legacy game cartridges directly via the cartridge slot. To play a game in the library, you need to insert the cartridge to play it. Of course, Mister is fully open source, but of course, Mister is not a handheld device. It's something that you'd plug into your computer, you'd plug into your TV, plug into your PVM monitor, those type of things, and you could play a lot of these games, and the compatibility support is really growing. PS1 is coming soon. Sega Saturn is being worked on. So Mister is pretty exciting, but I have to admit, I'm still excited about the Analogue Pocket. I hope this rundown breakdown, hope you learned something in it. Comment down below. Let me know what you think. Check out this article from Analogue. It's analogue.co/OS. You go to their website, and it shows all those different features that are in there. There's really cool things like you can button map, and it's going to remember the button mapping based on the system that you're playing, which is really cool. So like if you're using, I don't know, an 8-bit do Super Nintendo controller, it's going to pair with that really, really well. But then when you go to the Sega Genesis, it'll know how you want to remap it. Maybe you want to switch to the 8-bit do, or Nintendo, 8-bit do controller. People always make fun of me when I say it wrong, whatever. It's going to remember those different flavors of the mapping. So it's got some cool features. It does talk about some of these features are not going to come day one. Some of it's come in Analogue OS v1.1, which will come out soon after its launch. But when it comes out, I'll check it out. Maybe I'll do a review video on it and let you know what I think. And so if you're new here, hit like and subscribe, and we'll see you guys in the next video.